The Abandoned Sea. Story 1. The Curse of Dagon's Amulet, the Haunting of the Abandoned Sea Village. Once upon a time, there was a small fishing village that thrived on the bounty of the sea. But one day, a great storm came and swept away all of the boats and homes, leaving the village in ruins. Years passed, and the villagers never returned. The only signs of life were the creaking sounds of the old docks and the lonesome cries of seagulls. One night, a group of adventurers decided to explore the abandoned village. They rowed their boat to the docks and stepped onto the weathered planks. As they walked deeper into the village, they noticed that the sea had taken over many of the buildings, with salt water eating away at the walls and ceilings. They soon came across a house that appeared to be untouched by the sea. The door creaked open and they stepped inside. To their horror, they found themselves surrounded by eerie, life-size sculptures of the villagers, frozen in time as they went about their daily lives. As they explored further, they heard strange whispers coming from the walls, and saw shadows moving out of the corners of their eyes. They felt as though they were being watched by an unseen presence. Suddenly, the sculptures began to move. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and they reached out to grab the adventurers. The group ran for their lives, chased by the ghostly villagers, until they finally made it back to their boat. They rowed away as fast as they could, but as they looked back, they saw the village disappear into a thick fog. They knew they had witnessed something truly terrifying, and they would never forget the haunting abandoned sea village. As the adventurers rowed back to the safety of the mainland, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every splash of an oar echoed in their ears. Every gust of wind made them jump. They looked back at the sea behind them and saw nothing but the black abyss. It wasn't until they reached the shore that they realized they had left something behind. One of the adventurers, a young woman named Emily, had grabbed a small trinket from the abandoned village as a souvenir. But now, as she looked at it in the light of day, she saw that it was a strange object, unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was a small, silver amulet with a series of intricate symbols etched into its surface. Emily couldn't make sense of what the symbols meant, but she had a feeling they were important. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Emily started having nightmares about the abandoned sea village. She saw the ghostly villagers chasing her, their eyes glowing in the darkness. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. She tried to ignore it, but the nightmares continued every night. She became increasingly paranoid, feeling as though she was being watched wherever she went. She thought she saw shadows moving in the corners of her vision, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. Emily knew something was wrong, but she couldn't explain it. She started doing research on the village and discovered that it had been abandoned for over a century. The villagers had all disappeared without a trace, and no one knew what had happened to them. She also found out that the symbols on the amulet were part of an ancient language that had been lost for centuries. She couldn't decipher them, but she felt that they held some kind of power. One night, as she was lying in bed, she heard a strange sound outside her window. It was a low, guttural moan, like the sound of a dying animal. She got up and looked out, but there was nothing there. The street was empty, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. As she turned to go back to bed, she felt a cold breeze on her neck. She turned around and saw a ghostly figure standing in her room. It was a woman, dressed in ragged clothes, with long hair that hung down to her waist. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and she reached out to touch Emily. Emily screamed and ran out of the room. She ran down the stairs and out into the street, where she collapsed in a heap, gasping for air. The next day, Emily decided to seek out the help of a local historian. She found an old man who had spent his life studying the history of the region. She told him about the abandoned sea village and the strange amulet she had found. The historian listened intently and then asked to see the amulet. When Emily handed it over, he gasped in surprise. "This is the amulet of Dagon," he said, his voice shaking. "It's an ancient artifact that was said to have been lost for centuries. It's said to hold immense power, but at a terrible cost." He went on to explain that Dagon was an ancient sea god, worshipped by the people of the abandoned village. They had made sacrifices to him in the hopes of receiving his blessings, but their worship had led to their downfall. The historian warned Emily that the amulet was dangerous and should be destroyed, but Emily was reluctant to let go of the mysterious object that had brought her so much trouble. Over the next few weeks, Emily continued to have nightmares and strange visions. She saw the ghostly figures from the abandoned sea village following her wherever she went, and she heard their whispers in the quiet moments of the day. She became obsessed with the amulet, studying its symbols and trying to unlock its power. She felt as though it was calling out to her, begging her to use its power. One night, she couldn't resist the urge any longer. She put on the amulet and recited the symbols out loud. Suddenly, the room began to shake, and Emily was enveloped in a blinding light. When the light faded, Emily found herself standing in the ruins of the abandoned sea village. The ghostly villagers were all around her, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. She knew she had unlocked the power of the amulet. But then, she heard a voice in her head. It was the voice of Dagon, the ancient sea god. "Your sacrifices will please me," the voice said, "but they will come at a great cost. You will be mine forever." Emily realized too late that she had made a terrible mistake. She had unleashed an ancient evil that she could never hope to control. The villagers began to close in on her, their ghostly hands reaching out to grab her. Emily tried to run, but she was surrounded. She screamed for help, but no one came. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. She looked down and saw a tentacle-like appendage protruding from her heart. It was the hand of Dagon, claiming her as his own. Emily let out a final scream as she was dragged down into the depths of the sea, never to be seen again. The amulet was found on the shore the next morning, along with Emily's lifeless body. The locals whispered about the cursed object and the fate that had befallen poor Emily. From that day on, the abandoned sea village became even more haunted than before. The ghostly villagers were said to be more active, and strange lights could be seen flickering in the windows of the ruined houses. No one dared to venture near the village after dark, and those who did never returned. It was said that the power of Dagon still lurked beneath the waves, waiting for its next victim. Story 2. The Curse of the Abandoned Sea. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night where you could feel the raw power of the sea and the wind, the rain and the lightning. The small fishing village of Hope Bay was huddled down in fear, as they always did when the sea raged like this. But tonight, there was something different in the air, something that made even the bravest of the fishermen shiver. The rumor had been spreading for weeks that an old, abandoned whale rig had been spotted just off the coast, and that strange things were happening there. Fishermen had reported hearing eerie sounds coming from the rig, sounds that they couldn't explain. They also reported seeing flickers of light, even though the rig had been abandoned for years. It was only a matter of time before a group of young thrill-seekers decided to investigate. They chartered a small boat, packed some supplies, and set off into the stormy night. As they approached the oil rig, they could feel the tension building. The sea was rough, and the rig loomed ominously in the distance. As they got closer, they saw that the rig was indeed abandoned, and that it looked like it had been deserted for a long time. But as they climbed aboard, they soon realized that they were not alone. There were strange markings on the walls, symbols they couldn't recognize, and the flickers of light they had seen from the shore were now much brighter. As they explored deeper into the rig, they began to hear whispers. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but the whispers grew louder and more distinct. They couldn't understand what was being said, but they knew it was coming from inside the rig. Then they saw it, a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness, watching them with glowing red eyes. The group of thrill-seekers tried to run, but the rig seemed to shift and move around them, like it was alive. They were trapped, and the whispers grew louder, filling their heads with fear and dread. Then they saw the other figures, shambling towards them, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The group was surrounded, with nowhere to go. They were screaming and pleading for help, but there was no one to hear them. And then they saw the captain, a ghostly figure in a tattered uniform, his face twisted in rage. He had been the captain of the oil rig, and he had died there, along with his crew. As the captain advanced, the group realized that they were not dealing with just a haunted oil rig, but something much more sinister. The rig was a gateway, a portal to another world, and the captain was just the first of many horrors that lay beyond. They were trapped in the grip of an ancient evil, and there was no escaping its grasp. The storm raged on, the wind howling like a banshee. As the group of thrill-seekers faced the terror that lay before them, they knew they had made a terrible mistake, but it was too late. They had trespassed into a world beyond their understanding, a world where the sea was not just a force of nature, but a malevolent entity with its own agenda. In the end, there was no escape from the rig, no salvation for the group of adventurers. Their fate was sealed the moment they stepped aboard the oil rig, and now they were just another part of the horror that lay within. As the storm raged on, the rig creaked and groaned, and the whispers grew louder, calling out for more victims to join them in the abyss. Hope Bay went quiet after that night, with many of the fishermen refusing to venture out to sea. They knew that something evil lay just beyond the shores of their village, waiting to claim its next victims. The rumors of the haunted oil rig persisted, and the legend grew stronger with each retelling. But there were some who refused to believe the tales. They were the ones who were drawn to the sea, who felt its pull on their souls. They were the ones who were willing to risk everything to unravel the mystery of the haunted oil rig. Among them was a young marine biologist named Dr. Emily Wilson. She had always been fascinated by the sea, and the rumors of the oil rig had piqued her curiosity. She believed that there was a scientific explanation for the strange occurrences, and she was determined to find it. She assembled a team of fellow researchers, all of whom shared her passion for the sea. They chartered a boat and set out into the stormy waters, determined to explore the abandoned rig and uncover the truth behind its haunting. As they approached the rig, they could feel the tension building once again. The sea was rough, and the rig loomed ominously in the distance, just as it had on that fateful night. But this time, as they boarded the rig, they found that the whispers had stopped. The symbols on the walls were still there, but they seemed to be fading away. And as they explored deeper into the rig, they found that the otherworldly figures were nowhere to be seen. Dr. Wilson and her team conducted a thorough investigation of the rig, taking samples and measurements, analyzing everything they could find. And as they did, they began to uncover a disturbing truth. The oil rig had been built on top of an ancient burial ground, a site that had been sacred to a long-forgotten civilization. The symbols on the walls were part of an ancient language, a language that had been used to communicate with the gods. But as the civilization declined, their gods turned against them, unleashing a terrible curse upon the land and the sea. The curse had lingered for centuries, waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb the sacred ground. And so, the oil rig had become a portal, a gateway for the curse to spread beyond its original boundaries. The shadows and whispers were the echoes of the past, the remnants of a civilization that had been destroyed by its own hubris. Dr. Wilson and her team had uncovered the truth behind the haunted oil rig, but they had also uncovered something much more terrifying. The curse was still alive, still spreading, still waiting for its next victims. As they left the rig and returned to the safety of the shore, Dr. Wilson knew that their work was not yet done. They had to find a way to stop the curse, to prevent it from claiming more lives. But as she looked out at the sea, she knew that it was a battle they might not win. The sea was a force of nature, an entity with its own agenda, and sometimes it unleashed horrors beyond human understanding. Dr. Wilson and her team returned to the shore, exhausted and shaken from their ordeal. As they made their way back to their village, they noticed that something was different. The air was thick with an unnatural fog, and the wind carried a faint, eerie melody that seemed to emanate from the depths of the sea. As they approached the village, they could see that the other villagers had also noticed the strange phenomena. They huddled together, whispering in fear, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Dr. Wilson tried to reassure them, telling them that they had uncovered the truth behind the haunted oil rig, but she knew that her words were hollow. The curse was still alive, still spreading, still waiting for its next victims. That night, as they slept, they were woken by a sound that chilled them to the bone. It was a low, mournful howl, like the cry of a creature in pain. It echoed across the village, growing louder and more urgent with each passing moment. Dr. Wilson and her team rushed outside, trying to locate the source of the sound, but as they peered into the darkness, they saw something that made them freeze in terror. Out in the distance, they could see a shape emerging from the sea. It was a colossal creature, with writhing tentacles and glowing red eyes. It towered over the village, casting a long shadow that stretched out towards them. Dr. Wilson realized with a sickening sense of dread that this was the curse, manifesting itself in its most terrifying form. The creature began to move towards them, its tentacles lashing out, and they knew that they had to act fast if they were to survive. They scrambled to their feet, grabbing whatever weapons they could find. Some had knives, some had guns, but they all knew that it was a futile effort. Against a creature of this magnitude, they were powerless. The creature descended upon them, its tentacles crushing everything in their path. Dr. Wilson and her team fought valiantly, but they were no match for the curse. One by one, they fell to the ground, their screams echoing across the sea. Dr. Wilson was the last one standing, her heart pounding in her chest as she faced the creature head-on. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the final blow. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature paused, its tentacles freezing in midair. Dr. Wilson opened her eyes and saw that the symbol of the ancient language was etched onto one of its tentacles. She realized with a sudden flash of insight that the creature was not the curse, but rather a manifestation of the curse's victims. It was a warning, a reminder of the price that was paid for disturbing the ancient burial ground. With a deep sense of regret and remorse, Dr. Wilson and the remaining villagers returned to the mainland. They knew that they had unleashed a horror beyond their comprehension, and that the only way to prevent it from spreading further was to leave the sea alone. And so, they abandoned their village, leaving behind the haunted oil rig and the curse that lay beneath the waves. But as they left, they could feel the sea's pull on their souls, a reminder of the terrible power that lay just beyond their grasp.